Good morning. I am so grateful and delighted to be here with you today. It's indeed a pleasure to be here and to introduce a fellow scholar and community activist. Anton Flores Maisonet holds social work degrees from Georgia State University and the University of Georgia. He worked for 10 years at LaGrange College as a faculty member. However, he received a calling for a higher purpose. In his resignation letter, he stated, and I quote, "Charged by the college to profess the values and skills that undergird competent social work practice, and coupled with my deepening exposure to the life of Latin Americans, living both here and in their home countries, I am now compelled to answer a new, clear call on my life." In 2006, Charlotte and I, along with some migrants who have become some of our closest friends, intend on launching a nonprofit organization that seeks to develop intentional, interdependent relationships with Latin American migrants in LaGrange and with communities and their grassroots leaders in Latin America. This ministry of hospitality will be a venture of faith and a risk-taking venture that will require my fullest devotion, end quote. And he did just that. In 2006, Anton Flores Maisonet left his tenure-track faculty position at LaGrange, Georgia, to follow a call to live in solidarity with newcomers from Latin America, particularly unauthorized and unwelcomed immigrants. As the co-founder of Alterna, he devotes his full-time energies without compensation to developing this Christian missional community comprised of U.S. citizens and Latin American immigrants, devoted to the rule of law, love, acceptance, and welcome of all. In the past 7 years, Anton has been a lead initiator and organizer for such notable immigrant justice efforts in Georgia, including the annual Holy Week pilgrimage for immigrants, protests and nonviolent direct action at Stewart Detention Center and El Refugio, a hospitality house and visitation ministry outside the gates of Stewart Detention Center. This past year, Anton and his wife Charlotte, a public school teacher, have been foster parents for children of incarcerated parents who also faced probable deportation. In addition to these foster children, Anton and Charlotte have 2 sons, Jeriel 14 and Eli 10. I am delighted and honored to introduce to you Anton Flores Maisonet, and I would like to thank him for such amazing work. Please help me welcome him.
It is indeed an honor to be here this morning at this beautiful, beautiful facility with some beautifully amazing friends and acquaintances and other lovers of immigrants and of justice and of America and of everything that our ideals stand for. I feel like taking off my shoes as though we are on sacred ground together. I want to start, though, by just sharing some stories of some recent things. I'm actually on sabbatical. This is the 7th year that we've done Alterna, and since I don't do it for compensation, I thought I could self-appoint a sabbatical time, and so I have a lot that I haven't been able to share that I want to share. So thank you for giving me this time. In the fall, the co-founders of Alterna, Arturo and Norma, had family issues that were very serious, both within their own family, but also with their family in Mexico. Arturo's father has cancer that has metastasized. Norma's mother has had a stroke. And because of our immigration policies, they are unable to travel and be with their families and return to their nuclear family. So I went as a surrogate and visited and had the immense pleasure of receiving, almost as that surrogate, the love, the acceptance, and the welcome that this extended family has longed to give to their son and daughter and their 2 grandsons, one of whom they have never met and who is 11 years old. It was humbling to think that one never knows the depths, that one is capable of loving the other. To think that 10 years ago I had met this couple in teaching English classes in their church and had invited them to live interdependently with us in a co-ownership model of housing, and to now be receiving the love that should be reserved for them, and to recognize how even deeper our love for one another had gone just through that simple act. So I came back from visiting the coast of Veracruz and Mexico City, and I flew and I got to the Atlanta airport. Or actually, rather, it was the San Antonio airport where I had to go through customs. And if you've traveled internationally, you know how this works. You get into a long labyrinth line, and you get before the customs official, and they treat you with suspicion, maybe a little bit more for folks who look and travel in places that I look like me and travel in places I go to. But the gentleman said, "So what is it that you do in the United States?" The customs agent. I said, "I have a ministry with immigrants from Latin America in Georgia." This is an immigration official. He's like, "Oh yeah, I worked for ICE in Georgia," he said. He said, "They sure seem to have a lot of illegals," his words, "a lot of illegals in Cobb County." This was my greeting back to the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I said, "Well, I was going to visit the dying members of one of those families." And he got silent. I came back and I uploaded all my photos and created a wonderful slideshow with music, because I wanted Arturo and Norma and their extended families to see what I had seen. And through some of the videos, to hear what I had heard, words that were actually reserved for them, but I was included in this intimate circle. And I created this slideshow, and I borrowed a friend's projector, and I set up the projector in Arturo and Norma's house, and Arturo has siblings who live in LaGrange, and he called all his siblings to come, and one of his brothers was late, and that's to be expected culturally, you know? That's why they said this started at 8:30. But he was really late. And we finally got the phone call from him that he had been stopped in a roadblock. The city of LaGrange loves to do roadblocks, particularly in communities of color. They did 194 roadblocks in one particular year. One every other day. And he got stopped in this roadblock. On his way to catch a bit of nostalgia and to see the latest images of his ailing father. Why is it that when I crossed the border in one direction, I was embraced with love and acceptance and welcome, and the moment I stepped back, I'm reminded of the walls of fear that we erect, and of exclusion, and of inhospitality. And we know, I feel like I'm talking to the choir, that one of the common arguments is, well, there is the rule of law. We are a nation of immigrants, even politicians say, but we are also a nation of laws, and we must abide and uphold the rule of law. And I agree with that statement just the cruelty of law. And indeed, we know that under the guise of law, there is a lot of cruelty. We now are eagerly anticipating a movement towards comprehensive immigration reform. Right? If you read the papers this month, we should start seeing some movement towards comprehensive immigration reform. Last fall, we saw deferred action for childhood arrivals. And that was a moment of celebration. And when we know that those of us who have been pushing for the DREAM Act, much less a DREAM Act that didn't really become kind of a backdoor draft for military service, but those of us who were pushing for the DREAM Act, there was a bit of a letdown, but we had to celebrate because indeed lives have been changed. Some fear has been uplifted, some hope has been inspired. And so in that same sense, we must acknowledge that comprehensive immigration reform, whatever compromises come out of it, if it indeed happens, we must celebrate. I remember when I was in undergraduate school and my professor must have seen something in me because he said, Anton, you need to learn to rejoice in small victories. And I'm not saying that comprehensive immigration reform is a small victory, but it's not the end. And sometimes I feel like, for many of us, it's the end. It won't be the end. As soon as comprehensive immigration reform happens, there will still be migrants. Until we start dealing with the root causes, something that no politician seems to want to touch, until we start talking about issues like free trade policies that push migrants off their land and into their cities and into our sweatshops and then into our countries, onto our fields, our work is not done. Until we look at our so-called war on drugs and the failure of it, which creates dangerous corridors through Latin America, through Central America, and into Mexico. Until we deal with those issues and our obsession and addictions in a redemptive and restorative way, our work is not done. Until we realize that we sometimes are even complicit by calling for militarization of the border and decry and say militarization is the failure to deal with the root causes of migration. If we deal with the root causes of migration, then one day, the only people who will migrate will be folks like us, adventurers, explorers, and maybe exploiters of natural resources. And of course, until we deal with the privatization of prisons, that have turned mostly black men of color, and now many of us are concerned because they're turning brown men and women into commodities. Until we find ways to have black-brown unity to talk about the privatization and the commodification of the poor, our work is not done. If we do not address these issues, we will never know what it is to be a nation of immigrants and a nation of just laws. Until we have a bigger vision of a comprehensive migrant justice, we will never know anything but the rule of cruel laws, or in Latin America, the rule of unjust oligarchies. But what do we do in the meantime? Because if you know me, I'm not someone to just say, that's what the pie in the sky looks like. No, we still have to unroll our sleeves and get into the nitty-gritty of the everyday life. And so in the meantime, what do we do? And catch that term, in the meantime, because indeed these are mean times. But when there are mean times, there's an opportunity, a glimmer, a hope that love can penetrate that darkness. And that indeed, that single small candle, like the minister held up, can bring light into the darkest of nights. And so we have a wonderful opportunity to do great things with just small, simple, faithful acts. We can turn the rule of law into the rule of love and acceptance and of welcome. You don't need a president. You don't need a governor. You don't need to extract the Senate Majority Leader of Georgia to perform acts of love and acceptance and of welcome. Let us not lose sight that while policies need to change on high, that the most effective change and social movements will be that as we change those policies on high, our feet stay rooted and entrenched in the base communities. That our feet and our relationships are entrenched in our relationships of love and acceptance and of welcome of immigrants, especially those who are marginalized and undocumentable. Ask ourselves the question, when we started this journey, how much of it was because our life was engulfed in loving and accepting and welcoming relationships with undocumentable immigrants? And ask yourself now, how much of your life and your time and your relationship is still encircled by those relationships with those very same people? Versus how much of it is being enthralled and attracted to the lure of political power and of relevance. We need to stay rooted in our relationships so that one day the Georgia Immigrant Conference or Georgia Immigration Conference will still require interpreters, but it'll be because the people up here are speaking Spanish. And those of us who don't speak Spanish are the ones needing interpretation. Or other languages. I want to just close with just some stories that give me hope of this love and acceptance and a welcome in the midst of these mean times. Just recently, a group of us, and raise your hand if you were a part of the 21st Century Freedom Ride that started in Durham, ended in Birmingham, and had a pit stop in Atlanta. There were a group of us that were part of this Freedom Ride. As a part of the pit stop in Atlanta, we were to have a meal at Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church, right outside the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Historic congregation, historic place. And our meal was being provided to us by a dreamer. It was going to be a meal of tamales. She was a little late and was getting even later. And finally texted me and said, "Anton, we've been stopped by a cop." Now, I knew that of her status, and I knew she was trying to find a ride, but I texted back, I was like, "Does the person who drove you have a license?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Where are you?" She told me where she was. She was a block and a half away from Our Lady of Lourdes. We had just done a posada stopping at different places, highlighting the issues that confront immigrants today. So we stopped by a detention center and the ICE field office and Grady Memorial Hospital and Georgia State University. And we said a prayer of hope at the King Crypt. And we get this text. And so I said to the group of about 30 of us, right? I said, you guys were there. I said, everything that we've been talking about, in theory, is living itself out now a block and a half away. As an unlicensable young man trying to bring us our daily bread is being held by police officers and potentially could be arrested. And once arrested, we know how that all unfolds. So what did we do? The only thing we knew to do, 30 some odd of us walked over to the scene. young man. He's got his eyes wide open. He doesn't know what's going to happen. 30 some odd folks standing on the street here at Edgewood Avenue. And we just stand silently and vigil and just observe what's going on. And I approached the officer, and he asked, well, what's going on here? It's like, well, we said, you're holding our food. The young man that you pulled over has got our meal for us. We were all gathering at a church. We're church-going folks that are hungry. One of the guys, Steve Pavey, a phenomenal photographer, doing a lot of work around photography, documenting what's happening with the immigrant rights movement, is taking photographs of my conversation, and the cop sees him. He's like, what's that guy doing? I was like, they're all a part of this religious caravan from Durham. He's a tourist. I don't know, he's photographing. And the cop says, listen, I'll do something for you. I won't arrest the guy. Small victory, right? I won't arrest the guy, but if he keeps taking photographs, I'm taking the driver to jail. So I told Steve, I said, you've got a right to photograph, you do what you want, but here's the deal. You don't photograph, he doesn't go to jail. Steve stops photographing. 30 of us are still there, just standing in silent vigil, watching what's transpiring here. The young man had made a left turn, and on downtown Atlanta, during rush hour times, you can't make a left turn. That's what was the cause for him getting pulled over. The cop calls me over again, and he's like, listen, I'm trying to figure out what to do here. He was driving without a license. I already told you I'm not taking him to jail, but I really want to help you out. I'm not one of those bad cops. This is what he said. I'm not one of those bad cops. I'm trying to help you out. And I was like, well, because I do a lot of court monitoring. And I said, there's a ticket that you can give instead of driving without a license, which leads to a felony. You can give them a ticket that's like $25. It's no license on person. Like you leave your wallet at home. He's like, give him that ticket. He's like, good idea. So we stand back, 30 of us, right? 30 of us still standing there, right? And I'm giving them updates, and we're not as hungry anymore. Well, we are hungry, but we're hungry for justice, right? And so we're salivating now. And he calls me back again. And he says, listen, I'll tell you what. I'm just going to give him the ticket for failure, for the wrong left turn. That's it. No license ticket, none whatsoever, right? I'm like, that's great. This is wonderful. I call the guy, the young man who's driving. He's like so relieved. We come over. He's like, thank you, officer. Thank you so much. So what do? I invite the officer. I was like, why don't you come back with us and have tamales with us? Come back with us. The officer did not accept that invitation, and because he said, and I quote, sorry, I've got more tickets I got to get. We are not here to defeat the enemy. We are here to convert them. In loving and acceptance and welcome, we want them to welcome the stranger. We need to welcome our opponents. We need to welcome them into what King called the beloved community, a place where the rule of law is real because it's based upon just laws. In closing, I just want to share this. For the last year, my family has been undergoing a new adventure. We are fostering, not officially, not through defects, unofficially. We all know, we've seen the stories, and in my community, the stories are having real names and faces of children of detained parents who face possible or probable deportation. And so for us, it has been walking alongside two particular mothers, both of whom did have criminal charges. But even the acknowledgement of the prosecutors that if it were not for their legal status, and you can read into this, if it were not for their legal status or their lack thereof, they would have otherwise been given probation. But because of their flight risk, because of their failure to observe the rule of law as it relates to immigration, these two women have been given jail sentences of 2 and 3 years, respectively, for something that, again, that had been acknowledged, that probation would have been a viable option had they been U.S. citizens. Different degrees of the application of justice. Extra punishment. It's like when, for misdemeanors, you're punished with an interpreter's fee. Except this is even bigger. You're punished for being undocumentable by facing incarceration. In one particular case, I had the newborn of one of these mothers literally in my arms as she was sitting in court, or standing in court, hearing her sentence. And when she was sentenced, no officer of the court or the prosecution staff came and inquired what will happen with this baby. And so, in knowing that the fears of the fact that if the children are placed in the custody of the state, that parental rights could be terminated, we have for 10 months been raising one of these women's child. The child was born while she was incarcerated. Something that I would never want to wish upon any woman. I had never thought about the fact of what happens to pregnant, incarcerated women that have to go through labor and delivery alone, can't have any family members or friends there present, can't call or notify family or friends of the delivery. The mother was taken back to prison, not knowing what was going to happen to her child. And then we get a phone call when the child is 2 days old saying you have 24 hours to pick up the child, and that's it. And so we've been raising this woman's child for the last 10 months. It will be the hardest thing for us when it comes time to give up baby Emmanuel, God with us. The other mother has 6 children whose lives are still very precarious as we try to find stable housing that doesn't include them being split up into various state-sanctioned foster homes. If we stay rooted, I share this one because I want to give you a direct application. The mother of baby Emmanuel, who lives with us, is already a year and a half into her jail sentence and should have been paroled, was eligible for parole in October, but administrative errors still have her remaining in jail, and there's no clear date for her release. Plus, she has an ICE detainer, but I'm working with ICE on that side of it. Emmanuel's first birthday is March 2nd. I'm doing a postcard campaign to try to get his mother released and have them be reunified before his first birthday. So I invite you at any time during today to come see me. All you have to do is write your name and your city and your state, and I'll put the stamp on it and I'll send it off. So I would appreciate if you could be a part of that with me. The slogan, or la lema for Alterna, is love crosses borders. May I leave you with that charge. May our acts be acts of love. May we bear the crosses of those who are marginalized, and may we all cross borders. Thank you.